Everyone is a bust, part 2. Well, everyone except maybe Tyreek Hill and DeVante Adams, but we'll talk about a range of players. It could go either way right now on Fantasy Football Today in 5. I'm Adam Azer. I'm joined by Chris Towers. Yesterday, Dave and I talked about the elites, the top 8. We're still at elite players now. We're looking at picks 9 through 16. They are Barkley, Tyreek Hill, Nick Chubb, DeVante Adams, Diggs, Aaron Jones, Antonio Gibson, and Najee Harris. Recently, Adams and Jones have moved up. They're still in this range, but because of the Aaron Rodgers moves, they're closer to the front. Chris, Saquon Barkley, he's probably the easiest one to make a bust case for, right?
Yeah, and I think at this point he's probably falling in drafts more than anyone here because he hasn't been cleared to play. They're being cagey about what his availability will be for week 1. And so it's an open question, one, whether he's healthy or whether he will be able to stay healthy. 2, it's a question of how effective he'll be and how much work he'll get when he is able to play. And 3, there's the ever-present question about whether an offense led by Daniel Jones and Jason Garrett can, support an elite fantasy running back. I think Saquon Barkley certainly has the skill set to be in that top 3 running back discussion, and so he's still worth drafting in the second round because of that upside. But the passing game work hasn't been quite as present since Daniel Jones took over at quarterback. The offense scored 23 offensive touchdowns last season, which almost feels like it can't be true, but it is. Yeah, there's a lot of ways it can go wrong, from performance to just he's not ready to play for the start of the season and he never gets right.
Tyreek Hill, DeVante Adams, and Stefon Diggs are the 3 wide receivers being drafted in this range. Are they all very, very safe, or do they have bust potential?
I think Adams and Hill, because they're in elite offenses that have proven it over the last couple of years, and because even when the Packers offense wasn't elite, like in 2018, when Aaron Rodgers only threw 25 touchdowns, DeVante Adams still had 13. He's such a big part of that offense that even if they do regress, and I think they will, it's hard to see either Hill or Adams dropping outside of the top 6 or 7, even in a bad outcome. Diggs, I guess you can see maybe Josh Allen last season because it was such a weird year. It was a historic season for offense. And because he's such a hard player to game plan for as it is, because he's, so good at creating out of formation and, when plays break down, that maybe he was particularly impacted positively by whatever was holding defenses back last season. So maybe there will be more regression than we think, and maybe Stefon Diggs tops out at like 1,000 yards and 7 touchdowns. It kind of feels like Allen Robinson, when he's had to play with bad quarterback. Most of the time he's been good, but there have been stretches where Allen Robinson hasn't been, an elite fantasy option because of it. So that's the case against Stefon Diggs.
Right, and Robinson ends up being good, but not this game-changing first-round pick kind of player, second-round pick. Okay, so then we got the last 2 players in this group, Antonio Gibson and Najee Harris. Who's a bigger bust risk for you, Harris or Gibson?
I think it's probably Gibson, which is weird because he's actually done it at the NFL level. I have concerns about both of them, but Gibson, he was so touchdown reliant last season. We don't know necessarily that the receiving role is going to improve for him. We're assuming it will, but J.D. McKissic is perfectly fine in that role. So what if Gibson just sees a slight uptick there? And what if he's not really a 4.7 yards per carry kind of guy? What if we saw, a good outcome last season and we see a bad outcome this year? Maybe he's a 4.2 yards per carry guy who ends up being kind of a high volume, low efficiency back. And he could still be a number 2 running back in that scenario, but I could foresee a scenario where he's more like the boring version of David Montgomery that we saw before that last 6 games last season, where he was like an RB2 kind of by default, but not necessarily a difference maker.
All right, that is Chris Towers here on Fantasy Football Today in 5. For the full-length episode, make sure you check out Fantasy Football Today on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, on Stitcher, anywhere you listen, Google Podcasts. And it was a fun show. We had a lot of good debates about these 8 players. We will talk to you tomorrow on Fantasy Football Today in